we are the world. But it's just a really cool thing to experience and see how it's iterated on. Kurt covering Lead Belly and Unplugged is a great example of like the timeless feel that's carried in these songs that speaks to like the human condition.
Playing Nirvana.
The Cobain 50.
Nirvana.
Kurt Cobain's top 50 albums.
Nirvana.
From listener-powered KEXP.
This is the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. I'm Dusty Henry.
And I'm Martin Douglas. And believe it or not, we're about halfway through the entries on Kurt's list. So yeah, like, how are y'all feeling?
Tired. Very tired. But energized.
So this week on the Roundtable, we're getting into 4 pillars of classic rock. The Beatles, David Bowie, Aerosmith, and Lead Belly, which, you know, kind of fits sideways into the classic rock paradigm, but we'll definitely talk about that.
Yeah. And joining us today, as always, is Albina Cabrera, host of El Sonido, and our companion podcast to this series, El Cancionero de Kurt.
¿Qué tal, amigos?
Hello.
How are you?
And we've also got our audio engineer and producer for this series, Roddy Nikpour. Hey, Roddy.
Hey, guys.
So yeah, we've grouped these albums together under the working title, Respect the Classics. As I mentioned, these are, you know, mostly classic rock albums. And in the case of Lead Belly, it's the classic to the classic rock. These are foundational albums. There's that buzzword again, foundational albums in terms of the architecture of modern rock music.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like, I don't know for you, but for me, I feel like there's like we all kind of go through this phase where you go through like the classic, the quote unquote classic albums, whatever that is for you. You know, for me, it was going through stuff like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, you know, Joni Mitchell and things like that. Like, I'm kind of curious, like, you know, because these albums seem like that might have been that for Kurt, right? His classic rock indoctrination. Like, what were your experiences with classic rock coming up as a young music fan?
Go for it, Albina.
Yeah, I think that I was a big fan. If I have to go through this list, I think that I was more fan of Aerosmith than the Beatles.
Oh, interesting.
Being honest, because my classic bands to me, or at least for my generation, was more like the Ramones, let's say, or the Clash, you know, or Sex Pistols. That was the music that I had to listen to when I was a teenager. And then, I don't know, I had my Aerosmith period of time. Also Poison. Sorry about that.
Nice. We're getting into some real Albina lore right now.
See. I don't know if because I'm Pisces, I don't know. But yeah, I really like that. But something that I really like in one of the episodes that you wrote, Martin, is that we're talking about like classic rock, but it's a way to talk about the inspiration, like how a generation inspire the next one. And they are becoming like classics for mostly, I don't know, the entire world. And it was cool to see how these classic albums influenced some of the most important artists across Latin America, let's say. Of course, that it's pretty easy to say that the Beatles influenced literally the entire modern rock around the globe. But I don't know, it was one of the things that I like the most about all these albums.
I think my interests as a music journalist have evolved into like, what came before this? Like, here is the thing, but what inspired the thing? And so with the Beatles episode and the Lead Belly episode in particular, I really wanted to get into what came before this, because people knew about the thing. And in the case of Lead Belly, like maybe not quite as much as the Beatles, obviously. It's interesting to go back and figure out how the thing came together, which I'm really intellectually fascinated by, especially, you know, as I get older and as modern music sort of becomes less interesting to me, for lack of a better term. I have been, in an education on a lot of the older stuff. I have often joked since I turned 40 that I'm turning into a blues guy. So this was perfect for me.
In thinking about my upbringing in classic rock, like, first of all, as a musician, like, learning the blues was probably the first thing I ever did on a bass guitar, was like learn a blues scale and then like play around in that, and you can spend hours just messing around. And so just from a musician standpoint, it is one of the, not necessarily easiest, but like easy to lose yourself in the blues scale, just to mess around and learn how to play.
It's like the groundwork for being a rock musician or playing a rock instrument. It's like you learn, foundational.
Right. You know, otherwise, in terms of my introduction to classic rock, I think I'm kind of like Dusty, where it's like, you know, my dad, he's from Iran, and, you know, so he immigrated to the US in the 70s. And so he, you know, he has like Pink Floyd, U2, Alan Parsons. And so I was like, when I was growing up as a kid, I remember being on like a camping trip. We were driving, and he had on Eve by Alan Parsons Project. And, you know, I think we were telling him like, this is like old people music, like what the heck? And then he's like, well, someday you're going to grow up and appreciate the lyrics and stuff. And like you, Martin, I'm like, oh man, I'm getting old and I am appreciating the lyrics, you know, of Time by Pink Floyd. Like, man, so crazy. 10 years goes right behind. Anyway, that was my induction. And then also just to have a shout out, because Beatles is on our list. In high school was my Beatles phase, and I went through it by way of Yellow Submarine, because I was really into the like movie, and I like had John Lennon glasses, and I kind of evolved from like looking like Harry Potter to looking like John Lennon. So that was my classic rock indoctrination.
I think that unlike most of my colleagues who are sitting in this room with me, like, I grew up on hip hop and R&B and a little hint of gospel and house music. So it was like rock music in general, let alone things like the blues, are things that I had to discover for myself. And appropriately for this podcast, Nirvana was my introduction to rock music. So like, I didn't really have a framework for classic rock, except for maybe watching Aerosmith videos on MTV or hearing Aerosmith playing out of a Z28, you know, zooming down a gravel road in North Carolina. As far as Lead Belly goes, like, it was definitely MTV Unplugged, Nirvana MTV Unplugged, where I was like, oh, that's a cool song. And years later, it was like, oh, this is like the early edition of rock and roll. Yeah. So, yeah.
I like what you're saying about, I don't know, maybe getting older and rediscovering those albums. I think that as a music journalist, or I've been doing radio since I'm 15. And to me, I don't know, I think that is because I was young and a little bit ignorant, of course. I mean, to me, the new thing, it was the thing to tell, you know? Mm-hmm. And maybe when you were talking about a specific new local band, you know, a new punk rock band, you were maybe mentioning Nirvana as an influence, you know, yep. Instead of talking more about the classic rock. And yeah, I think that in my 30s is when I started, you know, going back in the past and understanding a little bit better how these like big artists and also albums is a must to understand what had happened in different continents in terms of rock. And the story about Lead Belly specifically helped me a lot to understand not only the influence of blues in Latin America, but also how that music influenced it in different type of music in Cuba, Caribbean, and more.
Yeah, definitely. It's like learning a world history like,
Exactamente.
through music. And yeah, I mentioned like some of those big tentpole bands like Pink Floyd and all that. Aerosmith was the one for me too. Like my mom loves Aerosmith. The first music I can recall in my life is Aerosmith.
My mother as well.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yay, yes.
Shout out to moms and Aerosmith.
Yes, right?
And yeah, that was just like, to me, like, this is what rock music sounds like. This is that is rock. But in my head, like when I default to classic rock, I hear that, even though now I know there's stuff going back further. And it's just interesting because, once I, became a teen and you get more autonomy in finding your own music, like finding Nirvana. And, I think Nevermind was maybe like, I don't know, like 10, 15 years old at that point. Like, but to me, it felt classic because I wasn't around for it happening. I mean, I was, but not coherent.
Yeah.
I was like illiterate. But yeah, so it's like, what defines classic really? Is it just before your time? Like, I don't know. And it's interesting to think too about something like Leadbelly, and you compare it in like the time frame from like Leadbelly to the Beatles is like probably like the Beatles to us now,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's actually a longer period of time.
Yeah.
So I think Leadbelly to the Beatles was 20 years.
Yeah.
So now we're, from the Beatles to us, even Nirvana to us is a good 30 years now. And so the Beatles to us is double that.
So I guess Blink-182 was our new classic rock.
Something that I really appreciated what you guys pointed out in the episode is like, it really does feel like a historical document, like listening to Leadbelly's recordings, because not to say that recording arts aren't useful, but I just think there's a lot of value in like, that was really just him like sitting in a room being like, well, here's a song. And then he just like busts one out. And it's like, there's not so much precision or attention to detail or like, how did you mic it? Or like, what effects or whatever. It's like, this guy just got into a room with a microphone and just like, played usually on an instrument, but in some cases just a cappella. And like, I don't know. It's like, it's almost like the original bedroom pop artist, like he just, I have this song, I'm going to put it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about folk music, it's not at the point of Leadbelly recording these single takes for, a Library of Congress project. Like, it wasn't like a style or a genre. It was literally a tradition, an oral tradition, a musical tradition being passed down from generation to generation because recording technology was new back then. And I think it is amazing, like you're saying, Roddy, that there were, no overdubs or no let's get a better take of that one, guys, or whatever.
Just like my EQ.
It's like the song, it's the expression of the art that is oftentimes learned, but in our case, we learn it differently because of recording technology. But, back in Leadbelly's day, it was you heard somebody singing a song, maybe your mom singing a song in the kitchen, shout out to moms. And, that's how you learn the song. I think that is worlds different.
The similarities that has, like, for example, with the rural Cuban music. On El Cancionero de Cor, I'm talking about Leadbelly and Elías Ochoa. Elías Ochoa was one of the members of Buena Vista Social Club. And Elías Ochoa was saying, like, how important blues was for Cuban music, specifically for the way to play the guitar and the chord structures, but specifically for the similarity with the tradition of rural music in Cuba, right? And the rural blues. And it's super important. And I think that that type of music style or the influence through generations happen across Latin America, specifically in regions where Black population is huge, such as Cuba, Brazil, the Caribe. That was, to me, like, the Leadbelly episode was like super amazing. So I love it. I have to say that because that helped me to understand all this like musical map.
Your point is amazing, Albina, because it made me think about how folk music was regional back then. And when we're talking regions, Cuba is not incredibly far from Mississippi, Louisiana.
Exactly.
So, like, that was a great point and a really interesting thing that you made me think of.
Thank you. Choquilo Cinco.
And that's what's so amazing, like having these records together is you can see that evolution like happening like in real time, like from just the voice with like Leadbelly, and then, you know, the guitar and instrumentation gets implemented. Those riffs get reinterpreted, you know, through Rolling Stones, Beatles, and things like that. Of course, like I'm glossing over a lot of rock and roll history, Chuck Berry and Susanna Thorpe, but you see in these albums, like, okay, now you have bands like Aerosmith are playing these blues riffs amplified, and then you have like Nirvana, like you call Kurt a bluesman on that episode, and like it doesn't have that same scale that he's playing with, but it's this emotion, and you could extend that further into like emo music being in the tradition of the blues, or hip hop being in the tradition of, like, where this idea that started as like an oral tradition has evolved 1 million different ways.
Right. In talking about the blues, this would be a good time to talk about the roots of rock and roll and Black music. I think you, Dusty, had a great point in how this all connects. And I think specifically Leadbelly was a part of that tradition. He might have been more obscure in terms of bringing the style to the forefront and inspiring people all over the world, but he was still part of that tradition.
Yeah, and I would just tack on to finish the point of, like, Black people have been doing this for generations. I mean, like, setting a precedent and then, you know, being amplified by like other not Black people, like white people and their culture, saying like, hey, those are cool sounds, we're going to make them too, or like, those are cool words, we're going to use them too. And then it kind of getting forgotten that, you know, a lot of what we consider American culture is really just innovations from Black people.
Black people are the arbiters of American culture. And I think you can see the roots of everything popular or artistically significant that has come from America in the last century. Totally. Even if it's just a little seed or a grain, like, there is something that was innovated by Black people in that piece of pop culture.
It goes further than you realize, like dance music. Like, I've been digging into ambient music. It comes from dub music from Jamaica. Like, it's if you dig deep enough in any genre history, you're going to come back to that.
The entire music, mostly, I don't know, the majority of the instrumentations as well, the instruments. I think that it is not very far away from today, the terrible ways how the music industry also used Black culture, you know, and how erased the Black roots in music. I almost say Latin music because also happened in Latin music, but I'm talking music in general, you know, like white artists singing songs that were recorded first by Black artists, you know, on demos, or this type of dynamics that, bueno, we can talk about it for hours, I guess.
Absolutely.
There was a great conversation we I think a lot of us were part of, or, you know, our editorial team was part of 2 years ago when Beyonce released Renaissance, about the credits on that album and how there's too many people writing the songs. But then it's like, oh, she's just giving credit to people in a way that, like, a lot of white artists maybe should be doing. Right.
To add on to that point, you know, I talk a lot about how the Rolling Stones kind of lifted from artists like B.B. King, Howlin' Wolf, and did not give them proper credit, and in fact made their own publishing company to kind of steer profits toward them instead of the artists who originally wrote those songs. Willie Dixon, Ike Turner, you know, like, I could go on and on and on. I think the great thing about the Beatles, and I mentioned this a few times in the episode, is the respect they gave to the Black music that they were inspired by. And I think that carried over from when they were in the Mersey beat scene, and how people talked about these American records, I mean, obviously Elvis was in there, Jerry Lee Lewis as well, but mostly Black artists are cutting LPs and they're being, for lack of a better term, smuggled into the United Kingdom, and entire music scenes have been built on those records.
Yeah. So many of these songs that stem from the blues or early rock and roll, I feel like have become, like so many of the songs have been covered so many different times in so many different places. Like, and I was in London a few years ago, the bar was playing all like 50s rock and roll. When I went to Mexico City a couple of years ago, I picked up a record by Los Loud Jets, which is from a documentary you recommended me.
Yeah.
And it's all like classic covers. And it's like these songs have become just a part of our language, like our universal like, musical language that it's a commonality that's come between all of us now. We are the world. But it's just a really cool thing to experience and see how it's iterated on. You know, Kurt covering Lead Belly and Unplugged is a great example of like the timeless feel that's carried in these songs that speaks to like the human condition.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that, you know, what people were going through back in the day is appropriate to what we're going through now. I mean, we have a lot more toys. We have a lot of different things that make our lives more comfortable.
And complicated.
Also making them more complicated. But the roots of what these songs are saying, you know, like heartbreak, depression, you know, being ground down by the powers that be, like those are things that have extended throughout the history of human life. And I think music is a great way to encapsulate that and bring it to the future and, you know, make you realize that like it's different, but not that much different. Like the human condition still is what it has been.
Yeah.
Conflict, oppression, that, you know, stems all the way back to the cradle of civilization.
Absolutely.
Heartbreak never goes out of style.
A lot of music now, it's really about the zeitgeist. It's about the moment. It's like, oh, I'm going to write this song about like texting, or like even a song that references something like TikTok. And it's like, it's very in the moment, and it's going to spike in popularity. And then it's going to spike down when that's not a relevant point of conversation anymore. Whereas like a lot of these songs in the, again, classic rock canon really speak to these timeless themes. And more importantly, like you said, Martin, they get handed down. And so at some point you almost forget that something was a cover. In the case of, I think, Nirvana's two covers that led people to discover Lead Belly and David Bowie in some cases, rather than like hearing those ones first and then realizing Nirvana did a cover.
Absolutely. And, you know, even like the Beatles covering Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, you can hear it and it resonates with you, and you may not even register that it was a cover. Like, I've forgotten several times over that that song was a cover.
And now you have people covering the covers who don't know that it's a cover, and it's like this, again, it just becomes part of the public conscious.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned like convenience and like all the new toys and stuff we have. And it does make me think about the rock and roll canon, because we now have more access to more music than ever before, like quite dramatically so.
It's maddening. It's actually a source of physical overwhelm.
Yeah. It's like at any point you can listen to any album that's been recorded practically. And how does that affect like what a rock and roll canon even means? Like it used to be, well, I guess I'll look at the Rolling Stone top 100 list or spin list or something. But now it's like, I don't know. To me, it seems like it reframes for me personally, it feels like reframes everything. Like the doors are wide open. Like you don't have to listen to these same 10 albums to have a musical foundation.
Yeah. That's why I think that I also have a different lecture, because for us it's like super overwhelming because we live and our work is around music, right? But I think that having the door 100% open is also allowed a lot of new people that found music in their lives. You know, in the past, I think that just a few people had the access to specific albums, you know, or just to be cool enough to fall in love with music. But I think that now people just can find unconsciously the music and became a fan or not. And it's where I think that we have to work a little bit better in you know, to train these new listeners. And I'm not saying you have to listen to specific music. I don't know. We can be, again, hours talking about how the music is producing different formulas of how a song. What I want to say is that having the door open for everyone, I think that also is building more audience for music. And I think that is different of what happened in the past. I think that is less elitista, the access to music.
Yeah. Going to your point, Albina, I keep thinking about the curse of variety or the tyranny of convenience when it comes to how accessible music is. I miss being kind of ignorant to some things, like not really knowing about this deep history of music, especially, you know, like we've been talking about Latin American music with you for the past year. I mean, you've been doing such a great job with that, even longer than that, way longer than that. But specifically with El Sonido last year, the El Sonido podcast specifically. And I just feel like I miss the days of not knowing. I miss the days of not having an opinion and it being okay.
Yes. And not having a panic attack because of that, basically. Yeah. Oh my God. Yes.
And
I'm with you.
Like things just being what they are, where they are, and not being able to have access to it. Like I think the cool thing about music discovery back in the day was that you found stuff that wasn't accessible. And that, you know, that was kind of a thrill. And so I feel like the accessibility of most of the music ever made is a gift and a curse. Like I like being able to listen to whatever I want, whenever I want, but also there is a sense of something being missing.
Yes, like curiosity, maybe, like the process of finding those gems, you know, and like you mentioned Cancioneros, the podcast, and I remember like Santiago Motorizado, who grew up in the 90s, is saying that, oh, I remember the journey that it was to get that demo or the copy of that album. And it was maybe, I was one day trying to find a specific song recorded of a friend of mine. So it was like the process was like so long. And I think that also feeds the curiosity, I think, in the music discovery.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love what you guys are saying because, like, you know, it's. I don't want to be like the ungrateful, like, freedom of choice that we have to listen to whatever, whenever. But there's really something to what you're saying about like physically having to find an object that will then produce the sound, you know, and so that there's a limit to that, right? I mean, there's only so many CDs in your vicinity or whatever, or records or whatever. And then like, how are you finding that as well? Like, maybe if you're savvy enough, you know to go to a certain music store, you know to even seek out a certain artist or whatever. But I think what's really, I don't know, I don't want to say it's lost, and I don't want to sound like also grouchy and old, but like the curation aspect of music seems to be lost. It's like, I mean, all these stories about how Kurt found these albums, you know, they're really fascinating because it's like, oh yeah, you know, this cassette was in his pocket given to him by what's his name from the Melvins, like, you know, that's really cool, as opposed to like, oh, scrolling on Spotify and I found this song. I don't know, like, it's just like, you know, just like
oh, I found this on a playlist.
Yeah, like a playlist. You know, not that we don't make playlists, and you know, we work for a music curation service, but that's, I guess, you know, that's my point, is like someone you trust, and like getting an album from a friend or like a family member and getting it passed down. I don't want to say it hits different, but like the curation, I just miss curation, whether it's from a radio station, whether it's from your friends, more importantly, like the proverbial mixtape or the literal mixtape at some point in the past. And just albums find us sometimes, not so much we find albums. And like that was a point I was trying to make in the story about David Bowie, is that like I think that album found Kurt for a reason or whatever. And like I think that in our lives, I think about the albums that impacted me most, very rarely is it like, oh, I was just on the internet and I found it. It's like somebody showed me this album, or like it came across my ears at a specific moment in my life.
Yeah. This is a funny little story. I was recently in Brighton on the coast of England because I have people that live out there. And I went to the store Wax Trax, and coincidentally enough, I picked up a couple Lead Belly 10 inches, and the owner of the shop almost jumped out of his seat to show me his unlisted overstock of Blues 45s. I mean, this record store is like some real crate digger type shit. And so it was fun. Those experiences are fun. Like being able to find something, an old 45 that, you know, is out of print and never got uploaded to streaming. And yeah, like that is something that's kind of missing in the ease of access these days.
Yeah.
Going back to your point, Dusty, about the rock and roll canon, I think that as music becomes more accessible, the canon is not really necessary. And I think it's part of what has somewhat made our job as music journalists obsolete, because we cannot contribute to a canon because there's so much out there. There's so many people that have such divergent tastes that, you know, everything is fractured. Culture is fractured nowadays. Like there's no such thing as a monoculture anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, like, is the canon necessary? Is the canon vital? Like, the canon is being smashed every day into little pieces.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking a lot in this as we've been talking. Like, you know, I'm a child of the internet, so like I'm love like virtual crate digging. You know, I can stay up so late, just like, and I have recently, just following rabbit holes of music and finding something new and like, what the hell is this genre I've never heard of? And like getting so enveloped in it. So I love that aspect of it. And I also love what everyone's talking about too, about the physical, personal, one-to-one action. I think one of the things I miss most that I think you're getting at too, Martin, is like the communal big moments. Like it's because our music taste is so, and it's a good thing too. So it's double-edged, but it's so diverse, and you can have your own personal canon and community in music that just doesn't overlap with anyone else's that you might know. Like I have friends who are super into EDM and I have no idea what they're talking about. Like they'll mention so many names. I'm like, what? Yes. And you look at their streams and it's like 1 billion streams.
Yeah.
But I think of something like, you know, Kendrick versus Drake beef being like one of the most moments in a long time where everyone was talking about it. Everyone was listening to it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen as much. Obviously, there's huge artists and pop stars, but I feel like we're all kind of in our own pockets, which is like really cool. And more music is getting heard, but also you just don't have that unification that you would have had like pre-streaming.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that the rock as the music style, I can see that is still alive, but play a different role. I think specifically in Latin America, you were talking about the culture, the current culture that we're living now. I mean, like music styles are not super important. Language is not important anymore. I mean, like we have this huge movement of K-pop, but at the same time, regional mexicano and reggaeton. So that is not important anymore.
Bad Bunny is selling out arenas.
Exactly.
And there's a big portion of those audiences that don't understand a word he's saying.
Absolutely. Actually, the majority. You know, and it's cool and you can enjoy it. And I think that it's playing a different role. But at the same time, I really thinking that across Latin America, the rock and roll is still part of this like new neo-trap movement or urban Latin, you know, culture of hip-hop culture in Latin America. You know, the rock is still a big part. And in the current political moment across Latin America, I think that the rock are the music that are talking about that. And that is not happening in reggaeton. That is not happening even in the hip-hop music in Latin America, you know? The rock bands are talking about what is happening right now in terms of, you know, society and oppressions and desigualdades, etc. So, yes, I mean, it's not mainstream anymore, but we don't know what is going to happen in the future.
The bigger question in terms of the rock and roll canon is rock and roll music important in the wider context of music? Because I think in terms of cultural import, as far as American music goes, hip hop is way more popular, way more innovative, and more important than rock music. I think there are so many genres of music like EDM that are way more important than rock music nowadays. And that's not even me saying, oh, rock and roll is washed. Oh, I hate rock and roll. I have
rock is dead.
Yeah.
I have a Little Richard tattoo, for God's sakes. It's just that it feels as though in terms of, again, monoculture is dead, but in terms of wider culture, it feels like rock and roll has been diminished in influence for a long time now. And I think you made a great point, Dusty, about the Kendrick Lamar-Drake beef being the biggest cultural moment that we've had in a long time, where cultural events don't happen like that anymore. Like even in terms of like everybody used to watch award shows in order to get that big cultural moment, in order to feel like we as a country or a hemisphere, you know, are part of something bigger. I think the Kendrick Drake beef was the first time in a very long time where it felt like everybody had something to say.
Totally. Yeah.
You don't really get that in rock music anymore because, like, who's the artist that's going to bring everybody together like that? I mean, you could say it was Oasis, but they're a band that hasn't played together in 15 years?
Yeah.
And yeah, like their cultural heyday was going on 30 years ago now.
Well, it just feels like the baton keeps getting passed, you know, like from genre to genre, rock star, whatever you want to interpret that as. Like, and I make peace with that. And I also making peace with, like, I'm not always going to understand. like I don't have any hate for EDM. It's just not my thing. But like, I can respect that my friends and billions of people get something out of that I've felt from rock and roll, you know, or hip hop is another great example. So it's just interesting. That's, again, goes back to that evolution. Like, it's going to iterate, and it's, who knows? Like, I think maybe rock and roll isn't the premier genre anymore, but it's kind of that spirit that just moves through each of these like peaks in music. I don't know. Before we wrap this up, you mentioned Oasis, Martin, and I got to shout this out. I had a couple people write into me on the REM episode. When I was writing that one, we mentioned the REM reunited while I was writing it. and made a joke that let's do Oasis next to get them to reunite. And lo and behold, the Cobain effect has extended into Oasis. So you're welcome.
Yeah.
We did it.
Bravo, chicos.
Patting ourselves on the back here. And on a more localized level, I saw that the Seattle Times wrote something in commemoration of the Beatles playing the Seattle Center Coliseum for the first time. I think it's 60 years ago. So I just want to give a shout out to us because like they didn't really mention the Beatles before we did our podcast episode on them. So
Put them on the map.
yeah, shout out to Seattle Times. You're welcome as well.
Let us know what band you want us to get reuniting next. We have a Sonic Youth episode coming up down the road, so we can work miracles.
Yeah, thank goodness the Smiths aren't on this list because that's not happening.
Yeah, I'm okay without that one.
Thank you to Albina. Go listen to El Cancionero de Kurt or watch it on YouTube with English subtitles like I do because I'm still trying to learn Spanish here, folks. My goal, and I'm stating this right now in the moment, is to be fluent enough in Spanish by the time we wrap up this podcast to where I won't need to watch YouTube with English subtitles.
Wow.
I don't think I'm there yet. I think I'm making progress, but I'm not there yet.
Try editing her podcast. That'll help you get a little more fluent more quickly.
Yeah. We have something for you, Martin, if you want. I mean, pero yes, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. And I think that, I don't know, maybe in 2025, I think that we can keep going these conversations, like trying to blend not only like two different series of podcasts, but I think that we are blending like the entire continent.
Absolutely.
And it's such a great conversation each time that I'm with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Roddy Nikpour, who did the David Bowie episode, and shout out for engineering and audio production. Always awesome to have you here, Roddy.
Always happy to be part, you guys. Thanks for including me on the mic.
Isabel Khalili is our podcast manager. Larry Mizell Jr. is our editorial director. I'm Martin Douglas.
And I'm Dusty Henry. This is the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. We're going to do a El Cancionero de Oasis. Talk about this connection.
Oasis.
That's good.